in a second here. We're really excited about this topic today. So what we're going to be sharing with you is what we have seen in our many conversations that we have with various clients and organizations around what are the talent trends that are emerging in 2023. You kind of blink, right? You forget that maybe we're already getting close to halfway through the year, but that's a pretty good baseline of experience, right? We're starting to see how the markets are emerging from a talent perspective, what to anticipate between the middle of May and the end of December, and potentially even on into 2024. So we've got a lot of exciting information to share with you. We're also going to make this as accessible as possible. And so what I mean by that is if you have a question, please don't hesitate to ask it. We will get to your questions as soon as we can. And so I think there's actually a Q&A functionality. You can also leverage the chat. But that's a big part of these webinars, is making sure you're investing a whole hour of your time, that this is time well spent. And so if one of us says something and you'd like us to go a little bit further into that topic, or you want us to clarify, please let us know. All right, so for those of you who have been part of these webinars in the past, thank you. We appreciate your continued interest in the information that we're sharing. For those of you who are either new to learning about CorTalent or new to the webinar series, our goal is to help you think a little bit more strategically about your talent, to help you get the people part right, like what we like to say. Now, if you look at what we do here at CorTalent, we are really good at helping companies get top talent into their organization, finding top talent, and then once you get that talent into your company, helping grow and develop that talent so that your people continue to help your business grow. And so making sure that you have strategies in place and that you're investing in the right people to achieve your business goals. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time in terms of how we get that work done. From a consulting perspective, it's worthwhile to note we work in sort of these finite tactical projects. We have a really great assessment service. We do fantastic workshops, and then we can do larger, more strategic projects where we help leadership teams and business owners think, again, holistically about the talent in their organization. Todd, do you want to just speak at a high level in terms of, or Sophie, in terms of our recruiting services that we provide our clients?
Sure, I can quick. So from a recruiting perspective, we do a couple different things. We do retained search, which in essence is us acting as an extension of your HR recruiting team. So we're exclusive on a given position. That doesn't mean that we're exclusive on every opening that you have within the organization. It's typically for a specific role that's challenging to hire. Oftentimes at the manager, director level and above is where we play with small to medium-sized businesses that are growing. So we really get in and try to understand that profile, go to market with those needs and expectations, and bring the top candidates back to you. Another piece of our recruiting service is project-based search. And this is where you're trying to infuse as much pipeline into a really hard or tough to fill search in a shorter period of time. So we'll actually talk about time to fill here in a minute, but the project-based search is when you need somebody or you've identified a need and you just need pipeline comparisons of candidates in a 4 to 6 week period.
Excellent. Thank you, Todd. So let's get into our webinar topics. Our speakers for today, I've already introduced myself, Rick. I lead our consulting practice here at CorTalent. We are also joined by Todd. I think many of you have interacted with Todd previously. He's our Chief Operating Officer here at CorTalent. Just a wealth of expertise that really spans the entire business. And then we are very excited to include Sophie in this webinar. Sophie, this is your first webinar where you're in the front of the room and not the back of the room, and it is a pleasure to have you with us here today.
Thank you. Yeah, excited to get started, get into it.
Excellent. Sophie is our director of recruiting. She's been with us for a long time, moved into that director role recently, and has just a wealth of knowledge and experience and insights in terms of what our clients are looking for from a talent acquisition perspective. Now, what we're going to do, and I kind of already alluded to this agenda, is I'm going to turn it over to Todd in about a handful of seconds here. He's going to talk us through the recruiting trends that we're starting to see in the marketplace. I will highlight some consulting trends, and then we'll spend some specific time for question and answer. Know that that question and answer really proliferates the entire webinar. So again, if you have a question, use the functionality, use the chat, raise your hand. We'll make sure we get you the insights that you need to make this a valuable use of your time. As is true with all of our webinars, we're going to make sure you feel well educated and you have the opportunity to engage in conversation and discussion. We're also going to leave you with a request for a commitment, right? We want to make sure that you're being purposeful in terms of how you're going to use this information to be a better leader for your team. And so just know we'll put you on the spot a little bit too at the end of this webinar. All right, Todd, with that, I will turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Rick. So as Rick mentioned, we'll go through high level 2 key recruiting themes that we've really recognized over the last 12 to 18 months. First, as you see on the screen there, efficient and effective planning saves time and money as it relates to the talent, the recruitment process, who you're bringing into the organization. One of the key things that we look at here at CorTalent that we think, honestly, every single business needs to have from a metric or a scorecard or a KPI perspective, key performance indicator, is the measuring of how long it takes you to fill an open requisition. And that's at all levels. That doesn't necessarily need to be at a director or VP or executive level. I would also do it for a lot of frontline entry-level employees as well. Now, those should be probably measured a little bit differently based on the type of role and that individual's role within the organization. But let's call it time to fill, right? Time to fill is essentially the number of calendar days, not rocket science, the number of calendar days it takes to find and hire a new candidate. As it relates to time to fill, why this is a trend is there are some things that are going on in the recruiting process that have really elongated that search timeline. And we just want you to be aware of some of those things and some of those hiccups that can prevent you from ultimately making that right hire in the end. There's really 4 key things as it relates to time to fill. Improper or incomplete job profile creation, right? Lack of clarity from the hiring team, typically on the must-haves versus the nice-to-haves. A drawn-out interview process or an elongated interview process. Some of our clients leverage assessments as part of their decision making. We love assessments, to be clear. Should it be a knockout tool? Likely not, which we'll dig into here in just a moment. And then the continuation of the fast-paced candidate market. Even if we're trending towards a recession, and even in the here and now on May 17th, the candidate market continues to move very, very quickly. And candidates have some of that expectation built in as we move forward in terms of what these processes could look like. So let's dig into each one of these a little bit further, just for some more context. So what I started with was improper or incomplete job profile creation. I think some key things to consider that are oftentimes missed is what does the role that's coming open from an impact perspective have on the business? So what I mean by that is this impact felt immediately? Can we work to cover the open position with a few other individuals within our business for a period of time? What is the overall cost, the overall impact? Because I think that goes into the decision making of how long and the type of candidate that you're looking for in terms of filling the role. Also, it's being decisive on hiring for where the business is in terms of the current state. Rick will hit on this a little bit in the future of the webinar, versus the future state, right? So it's really identifying what are the business goals, objectives now in the next 6 months versus 3 years. And what type of talent do we need to bring in? And then getting really clear on accountabilities. I think this is oftentimes the simplest. What is this person's roles, responsibilities within the organization going to be coming in day one? And how does that, continue to grow and evolve from day one to day 365, year 3, year 5, right? I think those are important things to think about as you're thinking about opening a job requisition. And then identifying and sticking to those 4 to 5 key must-haves, right? There's a lot of unicorns that are needed to fill a business. Mary Nutting, our owner at CorTalent, likes to say, go to the market trying to find stallions and develop them into unicorns, right? So those 4 to 5 key must-haves, yes, we have to check some of those boxes, but what are those areas and how do we prioritize them? And what are those areas that we can give to find the right person? Knowing that unicorns are very hard to identify up front. The second key thing is a drawn out interview process. One of the things that some of our clients have had the most success in is limiting the number of stakeholders and key decision makers in the process. Really work to include individuals that know the role best. Yes, know the organization best, but also know the role best. Is it necessary? Ask yourselves, is it necessary to have 6, 7, 8, 9 decision makers for a given role? And then it's planning each interview with purpose and intent ahead of time, right? So sometimes we'll have clients come to us and say, I want to have 4 to 5 interviews on our side, really get a look and feel for the candidate. Well, what's the purpose of the 3rd, 4th, 5th conversation? Avoid the trap of the same conversation that the candidate then has to have a 2nd, 3rd, 4th time. Also, can you get all those key decision makers in the room in the 1st or 2nd conversation and continue to calibrate and continue to move forward at an efficient pace? Last piece on that is be mindful of the candidate's time and process. So we go back to our time to fill metric. When did that candidate enter your process and how long have they been engaged with your brand and with your company? Really capitalize on the interest. A short, intense, you're not saying to hire the first time you meet a candidate, to be clear, but a short, intense process will provide both parties with plenty of clarity and ability to move forward. The third talking point that I had mentioned is leveraging assessments to legitimize skill set, experience, and culture fit. Again, assessments are great tools. We use them as part of our process in the hiring process. I don't want to undermine that. However, they have to be used properly. Assessments can predict future job performance, reduce unconscious bias, and inform the interview content, right? As opposed to really knocking that person out, it's there to inform. It's there as an extra data point. When leveraging assessments, just ensure that the tools you are using from an assessment perspective are validated. Far too often, like I've mentioned a couple times now, assessments are utilized as knockout tools. Remember, assessments are best leveraged as a fraction of the decision-making process. Skill set and experience should be at the forefront of hiring decisions. Lastly, the fast-paced candidate market. If you are properly creating a job profile, execute your interview process. Find a candidate match. Do not hesitate. Once you find a candidate match, do not hesitate to bring them on board. If you don't, candidates will, quickly find opportunities elsewhere. We understand the need for comparisons in the job market, right? I think it's being careful in terms of those must-haves, the give and takes, and really properly aligning that job profile and setting it up for success up front. In 2022, the best candidates were off the market in just 10 days. 10 days. So be mindful of that in your process. The best candidates were off the market in 10 days. From a comparison of talent standpoint, again, it's trusting the process, trust your instincts, and ultimately don't hesitate to make the hire. Key takeaway from this segment is quality hires will come when the job profiles and accountabilities are clear from the jump, right? Beyond that, implementing an efficient yet effective hiring process will save you time and money in the long run. So I want to bring Sophie in because she's our director of recruiting and faces some of these and has worked through a lot of these scenarios with our clients, and ask her a few questions that you all might be, percolating on a little bit. First one, Sophie, in a scenario in which a candidate is not an exact fit to the assessment profile, how do you guide the hiring team through those results to not use it as a knockout tool, but rather use it to inform the interview process?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think quite often, actually, we find that a candidate's results will not be an exact match. It's actually pretty rare that you will ever see somebody who aligns perfectly with a profile, hits everything on the nose. So we face this situation actually pretty much on a daily basis. And the way that we coach our clients to use the assessments, like you mentioned, is to just look at them as an additional data point, in conjunction with all of the other information that they already know about the candidate, whether that's from our recommendations, their experience interviewing the candidate's resume, all of that, plus the assessment results should be what they're taking into consideration. It's just another piece of the puzzle. And because there always going to be areas where the candidate's results are not perfectly aligned, we view this as an opportunity for our clients to ask better and deeper questions in a final interview to really get to know how the candidate works. Their answers to those questions that you ask based on their assessment results should be more of a determining factor in the hiring process than the actual assessment itself, because that will allow you to really learn how well they know themselves, how they're able to maybe overcome gaps that an assessment could have hinted at, and just give you a better picture at how they approach some of those things. And what we found too is that, like TJ mentioned, assessments shouldn't be used as a knockout tool, and that's for a lot of reasons. But I think one of the most pertinent reasons in today's market is that this can significantly extend your time to fill, and we've seen it by weeks or even months in some cases, because you're having to churn through so many candidates to actually get to someone who is checking every single box with that assessment. So that's typically how we will coach clients through utilizing those as a part of the process, but not as the be all end all in that case.
Perfect. That's a perfect segue into the broader picture.
Yeah.
What do you think is a realistic timeline to fill a position right now?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. So I have some data to share, but also just kind of what we've seen over the years. So typically for manager, director, and VP level roles, it can take anywhere from 90 to 120 days to fill that position on average. Usually because, there are more criteria involved or more stakeholders, just lots of things to consider, obviously, when hiring at that level. Once you start to venture into C-suite territory, you can often see that creep up towards or above 120 days. And that is, the norm these days. To give you just a little snippet of data from our searches last year at CorTalent that we worked on a number of roles. 82% of them were at a manager level or above, and our average time to fill was 101 days. So right smack in the middle of that 90 to 120. So it kind of illustrates the point that this is how long it takes. It certainly can happen faster if you really are, out there targeting the right people, you have clear criteria, but often there is just a lot to consider. And so that is what you want to plan for when you are looking to hire that level of role.
Yeah, and in some sense, right, it can fluctuate. The good news
Yeah.
about 2023 is our time to fill is starting to decrease, right? We're in the 80 to
Yes.
90-day range, right?
Right.
Things are changing in the economy. People are open to conversation. Things are, there's pros and cons to what's going on in the market when you're considering hires. which obviously will affect timeline, but realistically, that full year snapshot that Sophie just shared is spot on. Last piece for this segment, Sophie, is what advice would you have to hiring managers to help speed up the process?
Yeah, so I think there are three big things that I would recommend, and maybe some things to consider implementing at your organization. So, like TJ mentioned before, going into a search or to filling a role with as clear a picture of as possible is going to be so helpful. And so, once you as a team or as the stakeholders have identified the must-haves and the nice-to-haves, one thing at CorTalent that we've actually implemented is creating unique interview scorecards for each position that we work on so that we can make sure we are measuring each candidate against the same criteria, the same questions, the same must-haves and nice-to-haves to really truly see how they can stack up against that role. So that can speed up the hiring process significantly when you have really clear pictures and a really clear way to measure those candidates against what you're looking for. The second thing I would say is to keep the process consistent for all candidates and as condensed as possible. So if you have multiple stakeholders involved, make sure that the same stakeholders are involved for all candidates. You don't want to have a few people who interview one candidate and a few people who interview another candidate, and then trying to make that decision between two candidates is hard because not everyone has the same full picture. Also, we are a big fan of panel interviews. So if you do have multiple stakeholders, getting those people involved in interviews at the same time is really helpful for speeding up the process, especially if there are more than just a couple people who want to be part of the decision-making process. What we found is that candidates prefer like 2 interviews with multiple people in each of those interviews over 4 or 5 one-on-one interviews with the key stakeholders. And then I think that the third and the most important thing is to do your best to make interviewing and hiring a top priority. We understand that you also have a job to do and the business needs to continue to run, and there's a lot of things happening, especially when you're in, a smaller business. But like we've said before too, the market does move fast, and you want to make sure that you give candidates a good impression and do your best to keep things moving, and try not to push things out 2-3 weeks, if at all possible, because those are just things that can obviously elongate your time to fill and make it just a little bit harder in the long run.
Perfect. Rick, we're ready to transition into the next phase.
Well, let's transition. I'm gonna add my own 2 cents. I'm gonna interject myself.
Perfect.
I can't get that 10 days for an average top talent statistic out of my head. I think that's an amazing statistic. It honestly, I'm empathizing with our audience. It makes me feel like it's hopeless, right? Like it's whack-a-mole, right? The person's gonna be there and then they're gonna be gone. But what I hear you saying is that organization is key, right? Like if you were to boil down what's on the slide, a well-organized process will put you in a position where you can hit that kind of small gap that's out there right now. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, and look, like the 10-day is holistic, right? It's across all positions, across all organizations. It's just a statistic. The reason I threw that out there is yes, the hiring process is probably still going to take 80 to 90 days, but it's keeping in mind, once you engage with that top talent, like you said, Rick, to be efficient and organized. So you can run somebody through the course of your process in a 2 to 3 week, 2 to 3 business week period. So.
Perfect. Great.
Perfect. Second recruiting theme. This one's a little bit shorter, but one thing that's continued to be drawn out and continues to be, really fierce competition in the market is hiring this top leadership talent, right? It remains a challenge for many companies due to high demand, fierce competition, and just really finding that right cultural alignment, right? And bringing the right people into your culture to help grow the business. So how can organizations overcome some of these challenges to bring in the right talent to lead their organization forward? Really 3 subplots here. First, it's for the organization that's making the hire to really display cultural alignment. So how do mission, vision, and values of the organization align with the company's overall goals? And are you able to articulate that to a candidate that's sitting across from you? Right? Candidates really want to understand, what am I walking into? How do I fit into that puzzle piece? Which is something that, Rick will hit on here later as well. Articulate ability to articulate how the leadership team. So when you're hiring at the leadership level, a leader's coming in to join that team. How does that team work as a cohesive unit? How long have the leaders been in an organization? How have they assimilated into the culture in the past? What has worked? What hasn't worked? Right? You don't necessarily have to share all of those things with a candidate that's in front of you, but I think it's important to think about them ahead of meeting and ahead of even going out to the market to bring in top talent. The second thing here is sell, sell, sell. In 2023, it's important to sell your organization to top leaders through the course of the interview process. I can't express this enough, right? Clearly, there's a give and take here in terms of conversation. The candidate certainly has to sell their skill set, experience, fit within the culture. But it's important to provide, again, insight into that company history, the culture, the role, the position that's opening, how this candidate is going to impact the company and their ability to move forward. Open, transparent conversations are critical to really capturing the intrigue of that passive candidate market. Again, competition is fierce, right? The intrigue has to be there. There has to be give and take in those conversations. And really being mindful of the short and long-term vision of the company. Where is their experience going to be needed in the short term, and what are the things from a development perspective, development opportunities that are going to be there for this person long term? People want to understand what that plan forward is for them in the role. And specifically at the leadership level through growth, what is going to happen with the organization and how are they going to invest in the growth of the organization and the growth of them personally and professionally. The last piece on this one is really in investing in employer branding, right? Big topic, but there are some simple things that can be done that aren't super cost effective, or you don't have to go out and hire this huge marketing firm to come in. It's really treating candidates as if they were your client or customer through the course of that process, the interview process, right? Probably being mindful and tracking your current employee engagement, right? What type of surveys can you implement? Feedback, 360 surveys. What do people really feel is going on and working within the culture, and what's not working? Find what matters to your employees and your culture. Really gone are the days of ping pong tables, massage chairs, relaxation rooms. Again, mental health is super important right now. Big topic, but ensure that you're providing solutions and investing in your employees is really the key. And then creating brand awareness in the market, right? This is where you may have to invest some dollars, pending where your marketing budget stands, but it's really creating a brand, right? What's going to attract that candidate pool, that candidate market to us as an organization, and how are we going to be able to retain them long term? And that doesn't matter if you're in the financial services, if you're in the production, manufacturing, distribution, technology business. It's important no matter where you are as an organization, what you're doing, what type of business you're running. So a couple things, bring Sophie back into the conversation here first, and then we'll transition into Rick. Sophie, when you're talking about bringing in top leadership talent, maybe you have talent on your bench, maybe you have talent within your staff, and you're not sure if you should go out externally and post or hire a great search firm like CorTalent. But how do you know if you should promote from within or go external and try to find a candidate that comes into the organization?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think a lot of it comes down to timing. If you've got a role that's open you need it filled now. You really have to identify what skills for that role are you needing immediately within your organization. And is there anyone on your team who either currently possesses some or all of those skills that could step into the role, or is this, something that, you need it filled now, you need these skills now, and you don't really think they exist within your organization? I think the clearer you can be on what those skills are that you need now versus what you could develop in someone moving forward will give you a better sense of whether or not you could promote someone into this position, or whether or not you need to go external and find someone to bring in to this role who might possess all of those things and can really hit the ground running. So I'd say a lot of it is timing, but would also love to hear Rick's thoughts on this as well, and what he's got to say, obviously, about his trends. So I'll let you answer this question as well, Rick, and we can go from there.
Perfect. Thanks, Toby. Yeah. And this is a question we get a lot, right? We'll be meeting with a prospective client and they'll say, yeah, I want to hire this leadership position. And then it's usually like in the last 5 minutes of the conversation, they'll go, oh, by the way, I think this person on staff might fit. And you're like, oh, okay. And so really our expertise, in addition to what Sophie shared around helping you think through timing, is quantifying the gap. If they were a shoo-in, they would be in the role already. We probably wouldn't even be a part of the conversation. And so the fact that we end up inevitably getting involved, it at least educates us to say, well, there's some type of a skill or experience gap here. And then it becomes a question of how big or how deep is that gap. And then piggybacking on what Sophie said, if it is something that can be accomplished over time, then yeah, it probably might fit. You just need to know what those skill gaps are ahead of time so you don't accidentally stumble into them. And so we've worked with clients, sometimes there's internal talent and they know that the person's not quite there, but they don't want to just say no. So we can interview them. We can also assess them and their overall leadership abilities. And the end result is that everyone, right, that candidate or that internal talent and the hiring manager or the senior leader, everyone understands, yes, this person has these strengths that they can offer and continue to offer, and then we'll get them this development over the next 12, 18, 24 months that would prepare them for whatever that future role might be. And so in addition to timing, how much work is it going to take to get that person prepared so that you can more comfortably put that person in that role and really set them up for success? It's unfair to expect unrealistic expectations out of that individual. All right, should I turn it over to the consulting trends?
I think so.
Let's do it. So I will do my best to continue the deep insights that Todd and Sophie have shared. I'm going to flip over and talk about it from a recruit or a consulting perspective. The umbrella that I'm going to position my trends for 2023 under is retention. And if you didn't get it from what Todd and Sophie shared, recruiting can be difficult right now for a variety of reasons. And in the past 2 years, 2+ years, it's been really hard to get talent into your organization. You're probably just now feeling like the talent you hired 1.5 to 2 years ago is hitting their stride. You don't want to lose those people, right? But in addition to keeping that talent in your organization, you also want to be investing in them in a way that's going to continue to have them return on your investment. And so they're going to continue to get more valuable because you're going to take advantage of the trends that we're going to share with you. And so you'll notice that I use the term retention because that's really the flavor that I want you to walk away with this webinar thinking is retaining employees is incredibly important in 2023. Now, there's a right way to do retention and there's a wrong way. And I really like what Todd shared. Ping pong tables are not a viable retention strategy anymore. They were kind of fun while it lasted. They didn't have a significant impact on culture or retention or engagement or any of those things. So what are the real, true, meaningful things we can do in 23, and why are they important now? And the first one I want to highlight is really about middle managers and making sure that your middle managers are equipped leaders. If you Google what is the hardest job in a company, which I did this, middle managers are one of the top results. And there's a reason for that. It's not just because we tend to throw talent, individual contributor talent, into that middle management bucket before we train them. It's because middle managers have to balance strategy and tactics on a daily basis. That's really their job, is to take the strategic direction from the senior leadership team and implement it down to the team level. And if there's like one word that we could use to describe the past 2 years, it would be uncertainty or volatility. You can kind of pick your poison. And so they have really been through the ringer the past couple of years, and they are justifiably a little worn out. They're a little stressed. And so while it's easy to kind of beat up on middle managers, especially in larger organizations, we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to support them, that they feel equipped, that they feel prepared in terms of their leadership skills. You know, the old adage is true. People don't leave companies, they leave managers. It's a fact. And that's why if you look at employee engagement surveys like the Gallup Q12, a lot of the engagement items focus on, am I getting clarity and direction? Am I getting support? Am I being invested in from my manager? And so making sure that you're investing in the leadership skills for your middle managers is really going to have a significant impact in the overall retention of your employee base. Now, just a quick story for you that highlights this. We were working with a client, and I'm working with a client right now, and this is actually a new manager. And so this individual, he just assumed management responsibility of a team, and I've been talking with him about some strategies around how to kind of effectively get up and running to lead this team. And in a recent conversation, he was lamenting to me. He's like, you know what? There's this one person on my team, very tenured individual, super toxic. I have no idea what to do with this person. And it was kind of this fascinating story of, you know, he's the new manager of the team, but he's not, he's like the third manager to lead this team over the past year and a half or so. And basically, because previous managers weren't equipped to deal with this one highly toxic individual, the toxic employee would win. The managers would leave. And then what ended up happening, the company would have to start all over again, go out and hire a new manager. The team has been suffering the entire time because this toxic individual basically kind of beats up on people all day long. And so you get a sense of like, yes, it's you know, it's kind of easy to say invest in your middle managers, but if you're not doing that, bad things can happen, and that will have a negative consequence on your entire organization. So that's the first trend that I want to highlight.
Rick,
the second trend.
Before we move on,
sorry.
quick, I'm curious, you shared an example, obviously, where a client was struggling with this, but do you have any examples of a company where maybe they're doing this well, they're doing middle management and supporting those folks well?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sophie. So one of the keys to success, and this is going to sound trite, but it's true, just believing that it's worth your time to invest in middle managers, right? I think as a society and as a culture, we tend to treat that role or that level in an organization of like, cut your teeth, right? Like you need to survive middle management, and then you should get access to development. And that's unempathetic, wrong, if you will. And so we had a client that they wanted to do a training program for their middle managers, really their frontline leadership staff, which I applaud on its own. We worked with that client to say, we can help you think through your training. We really want you to create a set of leadership skills that the entire management team can embrace and embody so that they have a clear understanding of their expectations and what it looks like to live these leadership skills on a daily basis. And it was so much fun because we facilitated a workshop with the executive team. They were able to identify this really customized list of leadership skills and then specific definitions that relate to their culture, and then bring this to the management team and say, you know, we want to set you up for success. And so here are these skills that we feel are really important. Here's some development opportunities that connect to each of these skills. And we're going to meet with you and talk through them and make sure you're getting what you need to feel like you're building and progressing in these skill sets. And so that was a really nice win. And then you start to see the culture improve as a result of that investment. Cool. All right. The second trend is employee development and well-being. And you could justifiably say, Rick, it doesn't matter what year, this is always going to be important. And that's true. I will admit that that's true. I think it is especially important this year because retention is so critical. What we know, the research is coming out. There's a couple of bodies that have done research around sort of the state of employees throughout the country. Feeling invested in is a huge driver of engagement. Having a sense of progression is why people stay at companies. And so being able to feel like I'm continuing to sort of like build and grow my career over time is critical in order to retaining employees. And it is becoming more critical. And so I think I would empathize if you're like, oh, Rick, I've heard this before. It is worth revisiting some of these topics because it's growing impact in terms of how long employees stay at an organization and the extent to which they contribute to the success of a company. Now, what do I mean when I say employee development? Well, at a very basic level, and if I was to say using our experience working with clients, the biggest gap is around understanding employee aspirations. And I think it's important to start there because employee development quickly turns into discussion about job titles. And that's really the opposite direction that I would encourage these conversations to unfold into. When we talk about employee development, it's really about skills. It's about experiences. And so building capability is as important as a job title for many individuals. And that's important because when you have a sense of their aspirations, you can start to break down those aspirations into more achievable steps, right? I might want to be, I don't know, an officer in a company in X function, CFO at some point in time. Well, I'm not going to be a CFO for 10, 12, 15 years. Hypothetical, I'm not going to leave my role for a finance position, but I'm not going to be prepared. So what can I start doing now that will give me a sense of progression? And so a good example of this is, if someone wants to get into a leadership position, but they don't really have any leadership skills right now, how can we start giving them exposure to some of those responsibilities in a way that's going to set them up for success and add value to the team? And so a common example I give in this situation is have them run team meetings, right? Have this individual run the team meetings. It forces them to prepare. They need to do some communication, and it works with their communication ahead of time, like written communication, and it helps with their verbal communication because now they're managing the discussion during the team meeting. And so knowing the aspirations allows you as a leader to break it down into chunks where you feel like you can actually facilitate that development internally. And then kind of piggybacking on that idea is this more broad concept of getting creative. And so it is not uncommon that we will meet with business leaders and they'll kind of say two things in the same conversation. They'll say, we've got this really great talent and we're so nervous about them leaving. And then like 5 minutes later, they're like, I've got all these initiatives and I'm not quite sure how we're going to get all the work done. And it's like, well, you just said you had this great resource over here and now you got the strategic initiative over here. Why don't you marry them up? And so being purposeful in terms of attaching development opportunities to stretch assignments or strategic initiatives, it not only is an engaging opportunity, often it has high visibility. You're working directly with senior leaders. And so there's a lot of really great benefits from an employee perspective that makes them feel invested in, that makes them feel like they're developing an important set of skills. And that's something that we have a lot of experience in. If you're interested in talking through a specific situation around employee development or creative solution, just let us know. I'd be happy to have that conversation. Now, well-being, I think Todd did an excellent job highlighting why this is important, right? You want to make sure that you're thinking about well-being because it impacts every aspect of your company. It impacts your employee brand. So if you're a grind them out grind them up, spit them out kind of a company, guess what? It's going to be harder to get top talent into your doors. It's also going to be harder to keep that top talent. Now, the well-being conversation quickly can shift into expectations that aren't realistic, right? And so I think it's useful to highlight some examples of employers investing in an employee's well-being in a way that is both attainable and sustainable. And so some specific examples that I wanted to highlight is recently I was communicating with somebody, and in the email signature, it said, I avoid emailing outside of core work hours, and I encourage you to embrace the same practice. And I was kind of like, oh, that's a really nice touch. I'm not going to expect this person to email me late in the evening or early in the morning, and they're not going to expect that out of me as well. And so if you're talking about how do we take our current state, which is maybe a little bit stressed out, teetering on burnout, and take a couple steps closer to a healthy, more sustainable approach to work, that's a good step, right? Less emailing outside of core work hours is something that I know we can all do a better job of. This person has sort of built it into their email signature as a way to make that commitment publicly. Another example that I really like is when you think about a person's goals for the year. You can build in sort of this like holistic or well-being goal, right? And so often this is the manager talking to the employee saying, hey, what is something that's going to help you feel more balanced throughout the year? And again, the reason that I have the manager ask the employees, you want the employee to come up with the idea, right? It's kind of self-defeating if it's delegated or assigned down, but then the manager also gets to influence and figure out a way that makes sense. And so it's a way to give the employee a little bit more ownership and a little bit more control in terms of what are the work practices that aren't going to interfere with their core responsibilities and will also help set them up for long-term success. The last thing that I want to highlight is, here at CorTalent, we have half-day Fridays in the summer. And we all know that they're coming. It's going to come right after Memorial Day, and we love them. It's a wonderful benefit that we have, and it adds a lot of balance to our lives, especially being here in Minnesota. Our summers are precious, and we want to be able to spend time outdoors or relaxing. And so it's just another good example if you have that flexibility to provide it, and it can be a really big boost to overall well-being. I'm going to show a slide right before we wrap. I will also make a plug for good leadership. When there are good leaders in your organization, employees' stress goes down. That is a researched fact. And so, that's another good indication that investing in leadership can have a positive impact on your employee development and well-being.
Speaking of slides, Rick.
All right.
Just
what was that?
One thing, you have notifications that popped up that you might want to minimize.
Look, I'm talking about well-being and balance, and then
business
it shows
goes
all
on.
Of, like my 8 meetings I had today.
Business just keeps going on. We get it. Just wanted to let you know.
Thank you, Sophie. I appreciate that
interjection. No problem. No problem.
Okay, am I good to move on? Any questions to highlight?
I think you did a really good job of sharing some tangible examples of things that people have done or could do. I mean, my only question would be, do you feel like there's anything especially regarding employee well-being, that tends to have like the biggest impact regardless of organization, or is it really more so dependent on who your team is, what they prioritize? I guess maybe that would be a good thing to hit on.
Yeah, that's a good question. So it really is dependent on the culture, right? And whenever I say like, hey, half-day Wednesdays are great, there's very quickly going to be someone that says, well, we don't have the ability to be flexible with our employees that way. And so I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all solution. I think the idea of balance is an important criteria to consider, right? So if the expectation is that you're always on for extended periods of time, inevitably you will burn out, you'll run out of steam. And so being able to step away from work and recharge is really, really critical.
Hey, Rick, this is Mary. I'd like to offer a little comment as well that I see many times with my clients, you know, fear and anxiety and stress, actually, anxiety and stress are often caused by the fear of the unknown for people. And, I work with leaders all the time who are always contemplating what should they share to their employee base and what should they not share, or they don't care about this. And I always encourage them to share more than you originally thought that you might share. And it always pays off. And people will do surveys after, like, maybe an all company meeting. And the number one feedback that these leaders get is, thank you for being so open and transparent. Even if you don't know what the future might hold, the fact that you've shared what you do know and that you will keep the employees updated as much as possible goes a long way. So I think that's just a really good practical thing that all of us can be doing to help well-being in our employees.
That's so well said, Mary. I appreciate you making that comment. I'm always reading about like research for employee engagement, and it was understood to be important prior to the pandemic. It has since come to the forefront of employee engagement, which is trust in senior leadership. And that's a lot of what I heard you say, is that you need to trust your employees and share what you can with them and be honest in what you don't know. And that will inevitably engender additional trust in the senior leaders. And that's a huge impact on well-being, because you don't want employees going home worried about the company, right? That's the senior leader's job. You want them worried about their job. And so very well said. Thank you, Mary. Bonus speaker for everyone in today's webinar. All right. Well, we have about 7 minutes before the top of the hour. So what we're going to do now is open it up for any other questions from the audience. As I mentioned, we have the chat functionality as well as the Q&A. Sophie, TJ, any questions from you?
I guess one thing that I would be curious about, kind of related to your last talking point of, figuring out your employees' aspirations and getting, that maybe tied into their job or their growth and their development, is how exactly do you find out your employees' aspirations? Like, I know it's obviously as simple maybe as asking them the question, but how do you weave that into what you're doing and asking about those things, one, so it doesn't just come out of left field, like, hey, what are your what are your aspirations for your future? How do you kind of weave that in to make it more intentional as like part of what you're doing overall, and keep it top of mind too?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sophie. It's a quick story to follow up on that. So some of our services, like the talent calibrator, specifically address employee aspirations. And so there's a point in the process working with clients where we ask leaders to sort of share what an employee's aspirations are. And inevitably, there's a situation where there's this somewhat awkward either email or voicemail where it's like, hey, what do you want to do like in the next 5 years? So it's very good to be purposeful and planful around this conversation. There's a natural window during either the end of year evaluation or the goal setting conversation where people are kind of already in that headspace. It's a very easy, gentle way to bring that forward in, I'm not going to say non-threatening, but non-suspicion raising type of a situation. The reality is employees always want to talk about their aspirations. It's a good discussion. Even if the employee is like, you know what, I'm comfortable in my role, they appreciate the opportunity to share that. And so if you do it in a one-on-one, that's probably fine. If you set up your own meeting to have that conversation, that's probably fine. You'd want to do it in a way that encourages a sense of curiosity and genuine interest rather than check the box. But, anytime throughout the year is going to be well received by the employee.
Looks like someone might be typing in the chat.
Yeah, I think we have time for one question before our wrap-up exercise. Well, I alluded to this, so given that we've only got 4 minutes, I'm going to push us ahead. If you do have questions, let us know. We can address them in the chat. At the very beginning, we talked about, we really want to help our clients get the people part right. There are significant benefits when that happens. People collaborate more effectively with each other. As I mentioned, engagement goes up and employee stress goes down. And then people stay longer too. So in addition to getting top talent into your organization, the talent that's there stays, they feel more invested in, and they add more value to your company. So with that, I'm going to make a more direct request because, as I said, you invested an hour of your time. What are you going to do with these insights? We shared a lot with you. So in the chat, I'm curious, what's one thing that resonated with you? And that's what's one action you're going to take as a result of this webinar? Let us know in the chat. One thing that I'm going to use is that 10 days statistic. I think that could institute some healthy fear, prompt some quick action. Work well-being into annual goal setting. I like that. At least give it some airspace, right? While people are chatting, I will just give a commercial. We record these webinars and we'll be sending out a recording so everyone can see our themes and my meeting schedule for the day.
Yes, Sandy. Funny. The importance of branding the organization with recruiting and investing in middle management. I love that.
Yeah, that's great. Todd, I was thinking about what you're talking about with branding, and we all have heard someone say, oh, you work for X company, that's a great company. We should all strive for people to say that about our organization.
Yeah, that's great. Stephanie,
Realistic expectations.
Consistency in the interview process and hiring process. Of course, yeah, Sophie mentioned what we're doing on our side in terms of scorecarding and really being consistent up front. And it's made us more efficient in the end too, and made us more consistent when we show up to our clients. So internally, I think that'll make a huge impact for you.
Yeah, see a couple comments on middle management.
Yeah.
I think just being empathetic to how hard that role can be. If we're senior leaders, sometimes we forget these people have tough jobs. You need to give them a break.
Yeah, I like that. Unsung heroes.
Unsung heroes, that's right. We are at the top of the hour. So if you got to run, we want to say thank you. Appreciate your time today. Yeah, we will be sending out the webinar recording. If you were taking notes, good for you. We're also turning these trends into blogs. So you'll be able to get follow-up content that sort of summarizes what we talked about today, or you'll be able to share it with some of your peers that maybe weren't able to attend today. And so if you do have specific questions for us, don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to talk. But thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.